Wisconsin recall election and a look ahead this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. I've asked Wisconsin State Journal editorial page editor Scott Milford here to talk a little bit about what we've learned between Tuesday night and this morning. And I've asked Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance President Todd Berry to offer his unique perspective and talk a little bit about where we go from here. But I thought we'd begin with a story WISC reporter David Douglas did last week, his final story as a reporter for us before he heads to a new job in Chicago. As final stories go, it was a dandy and a fitting capper to the election.
Under the watchful eye of Lady Forward on the square Wednesday, something remarkable.
This gentleman came up and shook my hand and apologized for having to have a restraining order.
Mike Dickman, a protester with a loud voice and a vuvuzela, apologized to Madison attorney Fred Mose for blasting the horn inside his law office months ago.
So we put this behind us, and we're both going to move forward and include people and not be angry. And
I spent the better part of today offering that up to the Republicans that I've followed, taunted, questioned, insulted, offended.
A mea culpa of sorts in the interest of healing.
We need to be seeking understanding among our peers. We tend to counter positions that we don't understand very clearly.
Inside the meeting house of Madison's First Unitarian Society, Associate Minister Karen Gustafson encourages the question, why do we feel the way we do? And perhaps more importantly, why does the person I disagree with feel the way they do?
The point of intervention here is not probably at an election. The point of intervention is backing away and beginning to look at our whole political system.
How do we start? Perhaps expect more of our politicians, even the ones we already like. And then there's this. Stop getting so angry when they actually listen to people and change their minds.
But at this point, for any of our politicians to back down in any way is at great peril for them politically. And we need to make it possible for them to do that.
Politics will never be as peaceful as these messages blowing in the breeze. But if there's hope for an end to the division, maybe, just maybe, it started in a small way on the square with a handshake and a smile.
Move forward. Become progressive again, whether it's the same terminology that they want to use it in. How about just becoming neighbors again? Let's start with that.
Just seemed like an interesting way to start this show. Scott Milford, Todd Berry joining me. All right, before we start talking about whether that's even possible, that utopian view, I want to just look back briefly. And I just a couple of quick questions for you, Scott. Looking back on Tuesday, there's been some discussion of the recall backlash effect, that people are starting to think that it was opposition to the recall that may have caused some independents and even some Democrats to vote for Walker or not vote. Do you buy that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that Mayor Barrett had a higher hurdle to clear than he did the last time around a year and a half ago. In a normal election, you have to convince voters that you're the better candidate. But in this election, he had to convince the voters he was the better candidate, and that the guy in office should be thrown out less than half of his term expired. So I think that was a big hurdle, and I live on Madison's east side, and I've run into a number of people. It's not anywhere near a majority, but it's a small yet significant segment of the population, I think, that didn't vote for Walker, but they didn't support the recall.
Okay, money. As big an issue as some people are making it out to be?
No, it is a big issue, but and it's always an advantage, and I don't think you can just take it off the table and say that wasn't a factor. But there were lots of other things going on here, and Tom Barrett and his allies, we had in the paper this morning, they did spend, I believe, something like $19 million. I mean, in a normal election, that's huge. That's probably a record. So he got his message out, I think. I think that Walker was able to beat down his favorabilities in the polls. But the other thing we have to remember here too is this has been playing out for a year and a half. I mean, there were lots of messages going on that weren't just TV ads and robocalls. there were all those protests downtown for months, and everybody saw those, and I think that got some people fired up. I think it turned off some people who don't live in Madison to sort of this reinforcing this Madison, anti-Madison mood that they think they're everything and they get everything.
Yeah. All right, Todd, what did you think? Give us your perspective on Tuesday.
Well, I was scheduled to go on public radio Tuesday night, and I've been out of electoral politics. My wife, served 25, 30 years ago in the legislature. But I looked at a couple early town returns in Dane County, and I went, my goodness, the percentages were almost identical to what they were in the last gubernatorial race. The only difference is the vote totals rose. Right. And I said to Frederica Freiberg, well, maybe we should start talking about what this means for Walker, because it appears he's going to win. And that was, it was about 8:15, 8:30. And that's what I really come away from all this seeing, is how much it was really, in terms of vote returns, a replay of 2010. Now, I know that both sides don't want to hear that, but when you look at the data, with some exceptions, it's pretty much that. And, Walker's percentage was pretty close to what he had last time, and if it's a little more, maybe that's what a lot of money buys, or maybe that's what recall exhaustion buys.
And in hindsight, which of course is always so clear, but looking back at the campaigns, the John Doe accusations countered by the crime in Milwaukee accusations, the job numbers countered by response to the job number. I mean, I wonder if it's any surprise that it ended up pretty much the way the last election ended up. There was no significant difference because the union issue kind of got lost there.
Yeah, it really did. I, from the very beginning, said probably in the Journal Sentinel a year ago that I thought the whole job debate was silly, because both sides were playing games with numbers, and frankly, the media was not educating the public on what these numbers meant. And we kept putting up blogs trying to explain it, but the whole thing was just silly.
I think the other thing that, the polls were so remarkably consistent. I mean, Walker had pretty much that same lead for months and months and months and months. So you start to get the sense that all of this messaging wasn't moving the dial. And I think what the Democrats were trying to do is they couldn't go back to the same old arguments. They wanted to find a new argument that would move that dial one way or the other, and they didn't find it.
I don't know about you on Tuesday night, but we eventually in the newsroom ended up kind of going through the list. Could anybody else have won this election? And we decided no, not Feingold, not Cole, not Obie, not Kathleen's. I mean, do you agree with that?
I think Feingold would have had a better shot. I mean, could he have offset that 7% or so spread? I don't know, but I think Feingold would have brought in more cachet, a national figure, somebody who's Barrett's seasoned, but I mean, Feingold has been on a much bigger stage. I think he excites the left more, and he excites the middle more. And even some on the right, they don't agree with a lot of what he does, but even some more conservative financial groups like his attitude, for example, on the deficit or earmarks. So I think he was by far the best candidate. Could he have won? Maybe not, but I wouldn't say that he couldn't have.
Yeah. We tend to forget, though, that in the 2010 election, I remember looking at the returns and going, Ron Johnson and Scott Walker got almost the exact same vote totals. There was no ticket splitting going on. So it seems to me that everybody was pretty well glued into their positions.
When we come back, we're going to answer the question, where was Obama? Right after this.
early in 2011, I rushed in to try and fix things before I talked about them. Because you see, for years, too many politicians I'd seen, not only in Madison, but in Washington and beyond, talked about things but never fixed them. Well, but I want to tell you, looking ahead, we know it's important to do both.
We are a state that has been deeply divided, and it is up to all of us, our side and their side, to listen to each other, and to try to do what's right for everyone in this state.
I'm back with Todd Berry, the president of the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance, and Scott Milford, the editorial page editor of the Wisconsin State Journal. Scott, our friend Matt Rothschild last week wrote a blog just really ripping President Obama for not coming to Wisconsin to campaign on behalf of Mayor Barrett. Strategic on Obama's part. I mean, I can't think of any other reason why he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, he won big in Wisconsin last time. All the polls, granted they've tightened here in the recall gubernatorial environment in these last few weeks, but all the polls have shown that he still enjoys a pretty decent lead. And I think he looked in and decided there was more risk than benefit. It was as simple as that. He came to the Twin Cities in Chicago right before the election. He could have easily dropped in, but I think that they decided if he was going to go in, then they really had to win that recall, and I think they were looking at the same polls and maybe even more sophisticated polls than we see, and they just didn't see that it was worth it. I understand why Matt and lots of people on the left are mad that he didn't come in, but getting back to kind of your previous question about could some other Democrat have won it? I'm not so sure Obama coming once or twice could have made up that 7 points.
Yeah.
I'd put a little more money on Feingold running.
Yeah. Todd, you and I have talked about this over the last year and a half. As the state has been so focused on recall after recall after recall, there has been very little governing going on. I mean, just none. Now we've got to reclaim somehow that ability to govern, and it's you want to. They said the right things. Both of them did in their elections, in their speeches on Tuesday night. But from what you see, can we return to a functioning state government here anytime soon?
Well, it really is up to the legislative leaders and the governor, because in the system we now have, it's really a quasi-parliamentary system that's very ideologically divided, and party discipline is very aggressively enforced. So if the folks that have given us the talk want to walk the walk, then things can change. But, and meaning no disrespect, it's going to take more than a brat and a beer.
Right. Do you think there's any question that Governor Walker, I mean, well, I don't want to put you in a bad position here, because I'm asking about his credibility, his sincerity as he talks about wanting to do this. He took a lot of criticism in the last 6 months for being much more interested in national politics, talking to national figures, that he just wasn't focused on Wisconsin. This was all about conservative ideology that transcended Wisconsin. Yeah. All of a sudden, he's got a transition like this to being governor of Wisconsin.
Yeah, and I said on public radio, earlier in the week that, Scott Walker clearly has been a political leader. The question is now whether he can rise to something else and be sort of a statesman leader. We don't have the luxury of having, the monarch sovereign and the prime minister being separate, and you can like one and not like the other. So a governor has to play both those roles, and that's going to be a new experience for someone who was in a safe Republican legislative seat and who was county executive, but never really could govern because he didn't have a county board.
Yeah. What are you going to look for, Scott? I mean, to indicate to you that Governor Walker at least, if not Governor Walker and the legislature, are going to be able to get down to policy here.
Yeah, I mean, the legislature's not in session for a while yet. You know, it doesn't come in till January. I think the budget will be the first substantive place to look for it. But I think the rhetoric over the coming months is going to be an indication. I mean, most governors moderate over time. I think that, you know, Doyle may be an exception. He came, the former Democratic governor, he came in as a moderate. But I think if you look at Tommy Thompson, how did he accomplish some of those big things that he's known for? He accomplished them by pulling in some people from the other side and convincing them and getting some things done. And in a way, if the Democrats can hold the Senate, Governor Walker really doesn't have a lot of choice. He does have to moderate to some degree and work with the other side. If the Republicans hold the Senate, then we kind of get back to what Todd's saying is can he rise to this higher leadership, given that he's gotten so much of what he wants already and he's already made his national rep? I would think he can, but you know, that's what the first place I'd look is the budget.
All right, we're going to talk more about the challenges facing the state and then probably reluctantly a little look to November.
There's a self-satisfaction of doing what you know you're supposed to do, and if I'm ever going to complain, I need to, you know, take every opportunity to voice my opinion.
Just glad there's a big turnout, and I'm just excited that everything's over with.
I'm hoping that it pulls everybody together a little bit, and mostly that I can hear music on the radio again and not have to listen to everybody badmouth each other.
Oh, sorry. That's probably not going to happen. I don't think there's going to be music for a while. I think Eric Hovde was running ads during election coverage on Tuesday night. So while we were away, Measuring Success came out. Todd, your annual, the Taxpayers Alliance annual benchmarks for competitive Wisconsin. It kind of got lost in the shuffle this year, of course. But I wonder if you could just help us in the context of the election understand kind of, this to me suggests the challenges ahead of us and call into question whether or not we as a state can meet some of them.
Well, the biggie, the canary in the mine shaft, is always states' per capita personal income. We dropped to 7% below. We've now closed back to about 4% or so. That's not unusual in a recovery. We tend to grow faster early in a recovery, and then we tend to plateau. But you know, the story of the last 20 to 30 years, if it's a Wisconsin-Minnesota story, has been Minnesota has been on a much faster trajectory than we have. And fundamentally, you know, revenue for government, family well-being, et cetera, all comes down to growing income.
Is that part of needing jobs, or is it separate from that in some way?
Well, it's needing jobs, but it's also needing the right kind of jobs. You know, when you compare Minnesota and Wisconsin, the difference of the two states really is in the high-end jobs, high salary, professional, you know, business, service, finance.
I mean, in terms of what we haven't done, Scott, what's tops on your list as a state here? I'm talking about.
I think we so often don't look and at the big challenges, the demographics. I mean, we're getting grayer, and we and by we I mean our leaders in the legislature. They look at the next election and they make calculations often based on that, which is only a year or two away, and that's where the tax credits come from, or the incentives. That's where other goodies go for other special interest groups. And we don't look ahead and say, what's happening here where we're becoming more and more of a lot like the country, but maybe even more so, where we don't have enough workers. And even in Madison here, I mean, we have lots of educated people, but that we have to push that harder, and that we're losing lots of kids too. And I guess that's my biggest frustration is we don't look very far ahead, and oftentimes if you do, and you get on a commission with Todd Berry and you do look ahead, people roll their eyes.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned, by the way, demography, because that's something we have been writing about for 10 years, and it's very frustrating because the political leaders of the state are not paying attention, and that's why schools are hurting, because they're losing kids fundamentally, and our labor force isn't going to grow, and the senior population is in the process of doubling. It's huge, and really the political leaders need to talk about it.
And that's, I mean, that's the setup to this fall's elections, which are underway. You would like to think that these issues would be talked about, but we've got newly redistricted districts. There's some indication that this, again, is going to be all about politics and power and not about issues, right?
I would say that last summer's recall was Act 1, the gubernatorial recalls were Act 2, and the fall campaign is Act 3 of this ongoing political drama. What's interesting is when you look at who is filing, the total number of candidates for the legislature is down a little bit. The number of independent and third-party candidates is down a little bit. And what that tells me is it's the parties that are very tactically looking at where to put their money and where to put their effort and where they can pick up a seat or two. And, of course, the talk about that in the case of the state Senate has been going on for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, have you got some thoughts on how you can, on your page, focus this discussion?
I think no matter how hard you try, the economy is going to be the top issue. And there's ways that you can talk about the economy, whether it's demographics, whether it's tech schools, whether it's the graduation rate in Madison for minority kids. I think there's ways you can do that, but fundamentally most people are still worried about the jobs and the economy, and they will be talking about that in the election. And so, yeah, I think there's opportunities to try to get in there.
Nice job, guys. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
We're going to come back, wrap up For the Record right after this. That's our recall election wrap-up. My thanks to Todd Berry and Scott Milford for being here. Next week, we'll help celebrate 25 years of the important work being done to protect and improve our lakes. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.